Part number 4, I've got my big mug of coffee. Let's go. This is going to be quite a long video probably. I left off last time saying that I had a new workshop space in my spare bedroom and I had 6 months to get the bike ready for a big trip. After using the bike in Morocco, I knew that I needed a solid bash plate if I was going to do some serious off-roading. I already had the drawings of what I wanted it to look like, and I found this image online of the old school desert sleds from the 60s. I knew I couldn't buy anything like this online off the shelf, so I had to improvise and make one myself. I've learned that with prototypes you have to go in stages, start with something basic and progress further. So I started off with just paper because it's easy to modify, and then move on to card, which is a little bit more sturdy. Just using card and masking tape gives you the flexibility to mold the shape that you want. Here's what it looks like from the side. I wanted it to be small but big enough to protect the engine from any side collisions. Then I ordered a 3mm sheet of aluminium and used an angle grinder to cut the shape out. This took quite a bit of patience. I also knew that if I was going to bend this thick aluminium, I needed to create the creases. So I bought the widest brick bolster that I could find. I just had to upset my neighbors for a little bit in the afternoon. I couldn't use my previous vice attachment because it would definitely break. I needed something more sturdy. So I decided to create my own metal bender. I bought this door, which I turned into a table. This setup is essentially 2 angle bars with one of them attached to a hinge that rotates round and some G-clamps to hold the angle bar in place. Here's the top view. I had to leave a little gap here for the thickness of the metal. Here's another view of the handles that I was using to push the metal round. And here's all 3 sides bent and shaped. You'll notice that it wasn't a perfect job. There were these huge gaps here, but that's the best that I could do in my bedroom. I would leave the rest to a professional welder. Here's what it was starting to look like on the bike. And here's the bash plate bent and welded and also finished. You'll see that I also made this front number plate. Here's how I made it. I was digging into more inspiration, and this is another bike from Hello Engine. I really like the side profile without a headlight and a front number plate. So I started mocking that up in cardboard. I also ditched the Moto Gadget Speedo and replaced it with Moto Gadget Moto Sign instrument lights. I wanted to make a unit that would be both the number plate and house the instrument cluster. So I went through the same process. I copied the cardboard template onto a sheet of aluminium and started cutting it out with an angle grinder. I had fairly simple tools, nothing fancy. Here's the flat template. The challenge was making the same radius bend on the bench. I got this plastic pipe. You can see here that I would gently push up against the pipe and make that radius bend. Also, fitting the instrument lights inside the number plate was a bit of a challenge. I had to create this little bracket because I needed it to be removable. Here's the number plate with all the bends completed and the cutout for the instrument lights. The way that it would attach was simply by sliding onto a bolt that's connected to the fork triple trees. I didn't want to lose the side profile of the bike, so the next challenge was to come up with a new headlight system. And a quick little tip is, if you don't know how big the light is, you can look up the specs online of a particular model and then mock it up in cardboard and see if it would fit in the space that you're trying to fit into. I'll show you what the headlights look like later on in the pictures. There were some cosmetical things that were bothering me that I wanted to tidy up. Engine head paint was flaking really badly. I started scraping it off with a knife and sort of got carried away until everything was removed. Masked out the entire engine because I didn't want to remove the engine to get it sprayed. This was a bit of a fail sometimes. Even though it says black, the color isn't actually black. You can see I sprayed the engine with the kind of spray paint that was meant to be black. So I had to remask the engine again and use a different can from a different brand, which worked much better. I bought this dress-up kit for $5. These are just chrome bolts that replace the standard bolts in the engine covers. This was another attempt to replace all non-standard bolts with Allen type. I found this replica badge for the vintage TR6 Triumphs. I also replaced that since I was going for a classic remake. I faffed around a lot trying to figure out where to mount the phone. Because I've removed the speedo, the only way to tell the speed now was through my phone, and I knew that I would need navigation for traveling, so this was an important part of the build, but it really took a lot of tries to get it right. I had this mount from F3 Cycles, which was magnetic. I thought that made it convenient to attach and remove the phone, and I combined a bunch of other parts from Quadlock to add the dampening module to the whole system. This was completely useless and a waste of time. I drilled a hole in the fork bolt and tapped it to be able to attach the phone mount in the position that I wanted the phone to be attached at, which was in the right position, but in the long term it didn't work out. And again, I'll explain another time why this was a waste of time and money. Some more upgrades to the wheels and brakes. I decided to change the brake pads and discs to Brembo. Yes, I resprayed my brake pads. Do they do anything functional? No, they're just red. Fully serviced the brake calipers and had them cleaned because they were just full of gunk. This was also my philosophy throughout the build. Every time I'd have something apart, it would also be a chance to clean it, to give it a deep clean. Here's the new brake discs installed, and here's them installed in the rear wheel as well. Since I was fixing my brakes, I also upgraded the levers to folding levers. You can see this the standard one, and this is the folding one. Folding levers and a new front brake master cylinder. The idea here is that if I fall, or when I fall, the levers, rather than snapping, would just fold. Petrol Tank contempt number 3. Whenever I was working on a new design, I'd create a mood board like this for inspiration. I was really digging the classic silver paint, so that's what I went for. I found a local painter that seemed to be reputable, but he didn't do a very good job. You can't really tell from these photos, but when I got the Petrol Tank home, I was pretty pissed off because there were lots of blemishes and just areas that showed bad quality of work. I was so annoyed actually that I went back to the guy and I said that he didn't do a very good job, which was difficult for me because I'm an introverted person to confront other people, especially professionals. He pretty much told me to f***, but a few days later he messaged me and actually took the Petrol Tank back and redid it. Maybe you can't see here, the grey is the right tone and the thickness of the black stripe is also closer to what I requested rather than what he decided to improvise with. Also, he did a better job painting the tank underneath, and the idea with the black strip at the bottom is to make the tank appear smaller. On the newer bikes, the tanks are much bigger, and I wanted the illusion of a smaller, more classic petrol tank. So this was just a visual trick. I also had a go at creating a second visual for the Desert Rat. I took inspiration from some of the illustrations that they did in the 1960s, these sort of cartoon-like characters. Here's a few iterations of what I tried, and then I ended up on this image. And this is what I was striving to get to. I made a few printouts of my illustration to gauge the size that it should be on the petrol tank. I used chalk on the back side of the printout to use it as a stencil, and then with a sharp pencil draw over the lines to trace it onto the surface. And then I used paint to replicate traditional painting styles and brush strokes. I didn't want to paint the same thing on the other side, so I decided to paint the Triumph logo, the classic Triumph logo, rather than the new one. And here's the petrol tank now mounted back onto the bike. In the previous video I mentioned that the Mudguard would wobble at speed. It wasn't protecting me from the rain or the mud properly, so I had to go again at making another Mudguard. I looked at inspiration at some other bikes, some other desert sleds, and they just used a flat piece of steel or aluminium. Again, same process here, cardboard template. Here's what it looks like from the side. And then traced it over to some aluminium and added these 2 centimeter sections where I would bend it one by one. Because I already had my jig, I used the same technique to bend the Mudguard until I got to the right circumference. And I specifically made it out of 2.5 mil thick aluminium because I didn't want it to be too thin to flex and thick enough so that I wouldn't have to create Mudguard stays to connect it. The idea was to keep it very minimal. And because I had to achieve quite a lot in a short space of time, an important part to this whole project was to have some database where I could manage all my tasks. I was already using Notion, so I implemented this software for this project as well, and I'd have this Kanban board where I'd have things to do, so anything that was new that would come up, I would jot it down in here. Then when I was working on it, I'd put it into progress. And then when it was done, it'd go into done. And things that I wasn't going to do would go into cancelled. And each task would be broken out into another to-do list, things that I would need to buy, and images for inspiration. And from the buy list, I could also tally up my total for that task so that I knew the running cost of the entire project. After 10,000 odd miles, I needed to upgrade my chain and sprockets because my chain was really rusty. The problem with online shopping, especially for sprockets, is they don't show you exactly what they look like. They just give you a rough indication of what you're going to get. So when the sprocket arrived, I wasn't very happy with the shape of it. By this point, you probably have guessed that I'm very particular about the aesthetics of the parts. I learned a little trick to remove the front sprocket. Once you cut the chain apart, you can loop it around the rear axle and put a few bolts through, which would create a tension pulley. And with a long breaker bar, you'd have something stopping the sprocket from slipping, and you can undo the nut that holds it, which is super tight. Here's what they looked like on the bike, but I wasn't happy with them, so I ended up buying a different set of sprockets and chains. Yes, hang on. Also, for every job that I needed to do that I didn't have the tool for, I would buy the necessary tools so that I could continue working. Case in point, I bought a very fancy torque meter because I needed to set the front sprocket to 132 Newton meters. These are the other sprockets and the DID chain that I was much happier with. Small but quite useful upgrade. I also made a few adjustments to the pedals. I found this cleat online that closer matched my pegs, but I had no way of attaching it to the actual shifters. So I had to make a little bracket out of a block of aluminium. Aluminium gets really hot. The first time that I took it off and dropped it on the floor, it melted a hole in my carpet. So if you're using the angle grinder on a solid block of aluminium, be careful where you put it. Here's the piece taking shape. Here's what it looks like mounted to the shifter. Previously I had a set of YSS shocks, and I decided to upgrade to something a little bit more serious that would be more reliable on a longer journey. After lots and lots of research, I decided to go with Bitubo. This was actually a custom set that I got them to make because you could only buy them in either full black with black springs or full silver with chrome springs. Luckily they were nice enough to combine black shocks with chrome springs. They also had dampening adjusters. I'll show another video why they were actually incredibly stiff even stiffer than my previous shocks. I had another challenge of working out where my luggage would go. A few different prototypes. I thought maybe my bag would go on its side like this, or I had a crazy idea of creating a sissy bar so that the bag would sit upright, which also meant that I had a place for the number plate. Here's some mock-ups here using a copper tube. Here's where the number plate would go, and the frame naturally has these tubes that run along the seat pan, and the thinking was that I could slide them inside the frame, which would provide a sturdy enough lever to hold it. I was worried that at this point here where the rack bends would be a weak spot, and after many miles it was likely that that point would snap and fail. So it was a nice concept, but I didn't end up going with it in the long term. After many months of tinkering with the bike inside my spare bedroom, I was actually ready to take it outside and run it. Here's some more pictures of what it looked like at this stage. Here's the headlight that I was talking about. It is a Diode Dynamics SS2 Pro, which is super small and has about 2000 lumens, making it extremely bright, almost too bright. Here's what it looks like from the front. And then one day when I wanted to take it for a proper test ride, the bike wouldn't start at all. So I wheeled it to the nearest mechanic, and they realized that the power commander that was installed on it, that controlled all the tuning that's been set up, died. And they removed it from the bike, which made it, let's just say, unrideable. And I still made the mistake of going for a test ride, and then this happened. I crashed. And I crashed really badly. I crashed into another motorcyclist that was stationary at the red lights. I've got a little illustration to show you what happened. This is what I showed the insurance company. Essentially, I was coming at moderate speed and the throttle jammed and the bike sped up. But because my front brake wasn't bled very well, I slammed on my rear brake and essentially just skidded out of control as the bike was accelerating. And I fell on my right hand side and slid forward and hit the other motorcyclist, and his bike fell over as well. Long story short, the insurance had to pay out quite a bit of money to the other guy, and my bike wasn't necessarily broken, but it was definitely a setback. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because not everything in a project is sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes happens and you have to find the motivation to continue. In all honesty, I thought, even though I was so close to finishing the project and starting this trip, I felt like giving up. I felt like one step forward took me 2 steps back. Not only was there a financial setback, but it was also a mental setback, making me worried that I'm not a very good rider. After about a week lying in bed with bruises and scrapes and the help of some medicine, I did fix the bike again. And this crash actually helped me realize the weak points in my project that I could fix now so that I wouldn't have to encounter them on the road. And I'll show you what that was in the next video.